get started, and then everyone can join in as they come along. And again, download this script.js because we're going to be working on this today. Instead of you having to manually type all this out, you'll just be ready. Okay, so I don't actually have slides for today. We'll just be working in my IDE, and it looks like this. Okay, so before we actually get into building the website stuff, a little crash course on like JavaScript and stuff. So if you've never seen it, and hopefully you have a bit of programming experience, but I'll still explain what some of the code does. So this is my normal HTML page, and then if I want to load in some of my JavaScript in a JavaScript file, for example, this basics.js, I write the script tag and then give it a source attribute to the location of my JavaScript file. So in this case, I have 3 of them, and we'll go through them as we go through this. So this is what JavaScript looks like. So you can have comments in a double slash for like single line comments. You can have multi-line comments with these little slash asterisks. I'll make this bigger. And so you can have variables, which stores a bit of data. You assign it like this. So right here, I assigned this string to this website name variable. And this is what a function looks like. So you say function and then your function name, and then you give it some arguments. So in this case, text. And then here we're returning text, and then we're doing a bit of string manipulation. So text plus, then we put a dash here, website name. So what this code is doing is it's taking like any text you give it, and then making like a string you'd see in a tab. And here we're calling this function, and we're giving it an argument of home, and then we're console logging this. So you can see the console if we go to this. So we can comment this out. And this initial part will be quick, so that way we have more time to actually mess around with the website. But just so that everyone knows what's actually going on. So this is my console.log. And if you're wondering how I got to the screen, I press Control-Shift-I, and that brings it up. Or you can do right-click and inspect. And you go to this console tab up here. And you can see it logged my string out to this console. So it took my home, which I gave it, and then it added a dash, and then it took the website name from where is it, here, and it added these. So that's really that's at its basics what JavaScript is. So you don't compile it. This is an interpreted language, which means that the browser just reads this as it comes along. And what else? You don't have to declare types. So if you've been using C or C++ in your classes, you don't add like types here. The browser, when it's interpreting it, just kind of assumes what it is. So in this case, this, not to say that types don't exist. So this is a string, a variable of type string, and then you can assign numbers. So const number equal to 2, and then this is a variable of type number. And I should explain what this const is. So if I try to number to reassign this number, if I go back here, it'll tell me I can't do that because it's a constant variable. If I wanted to make it so that I could reassign it, I could, instead of using const, I'd do let. And what let lets you do is reassign that variable. Okay, so that's really basics. Loops as well. So this is an array, which is just a list. And I have a bunch of like strings here, bunch of like names that I like to make tab text for, essentially, as an example. And then I want to store them in this other list, in this variable. So I write a for loop, and this is what a for loop looks like. And again, you don't write types. So I declare a variable of I, and I want I to be reassignable. So I don't use const, I use let. And then I say I is equal to 0. So start at this, is the 0th position of my array. And then while this I is less than the length of this array, keep adding 1 to I. And then here I have a variable that takes the thing that is in the position of I in this list. So if I was 1, it would take this Discord bot thing, because this is position 1. So we assign it to this, and then this is what conditionals look like in JavaScript. So your if else. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm saying if project name is equal to GDSE website, I want to add a little star next to it. And if it's Discord bot, I don't want to show people that. Just I guess I want to hide it in this example. And if somewhere in my list I get something that says stop here, I break out of this loop. So in here we're continuing, so it would go to web dev crash course, but here we're saying just stop. So this won't show, this loop will never get to this last one, because we said to break out of this loop here. And then what I'm doing is I'm calling make tab string from here, and then I'm pushing it to my list, and then I'm console logging it out. And then this is another way of doing loops. So this for each thing, you can, and I'm giving it an arrow function. This might look a little weird if you've never seen JavaScript, or if you've coded in other languages. This essentially, instead of doing function and then putting in a name, and then let's say you don't actually need to reuse this. So for example, I used make tab string here and here, but if I'm just using it in one place, I can give this an anonymous arrow function. So instead of declaring function and then my whole thing, I don't give it a name. I just give it an argument, and then I put this little equal thing, and then I write these brackets, and then this is counted as a function. Oh, and another important thing, this concept of scope. If you are a beginner programmer and don't know what scope is, let's say I declare number, my new number equal to 4. If I declare this in here, the scope of this variable is between these two brackets. So if I try to console, what does that mean? If I try to console.log my new number, what's going to happen is if I first off make it so that it loads my script and I refresh, you'll see that it says that my new number isn't defined. It can't find it because my new number only exists between these two brackets. So that's another concept to watch out for. And then the last thing for like the basics of what we're talking about is the DOM. So when you load, or when the browser grabs the HTML, it creates what's called a document object model. And that is essentially what this is. So all of these are objects in my document. So I can actually like manipulate these. So for example, if we look at this, I can tell my JavaScript to get an element by ID. So if you went to our CSS one, you can give these like each element its ID property. So in this case, this variable is going to contain this document node. And if I and you can also do it this way, where kind of like CSS, you have selectors. So in this case, I'm trying to get this myList element, or an element with a class of myList from this wrapper element. And I'm calling this query selector function on this node object. And you can even see right here, it says HTML element. So it'll grab this. And what this code is doing, so this project, it grabs the array from this last file, and then for each of the text items in that list, it makes a new element, li, so that's a list element, and then it sets the inner text of that element to the project tab text, and then it adds that element to this list element variable. So it kind of looks like this. And again, remember to actually load stuff in. So it looks like this. So we just manipulated the DOM. So even though this is static, meaning we wrote this out and it won't dynamically change, we use JavaScript to dynamically change our static website. And so that's what we're actually going to do with, where did it go with this? So even though in our web portfolio it's like it doesn't change, we can dynamically manipulate the document object model, the DOM, with the functions that I just showed you. And you can grab data off of APIs, and I'll show everyone how to do that in a bit. But that is the JavaScript basics for the web. Now, there's ways to run JavaScript on your computer, but that'll be a separate event. We're just going to focus on browser web stuff right now. The last thing I want to talk about is events. So let's say I want this button to do something. So I want it to delete the first item here. What you can do is, so I grab the button from the DOM and then I save it to this variable. Then I can call add event listener, and that's a function of an HTML element that lets you add, essentially it listens to events. So in this case, I'm telling it, if this button ever sees, or in this, it sees a click event, then call this function or this delete thing. And this delete thing grabs the first thing and it just like removes that element from the DOM. And you can also write function like this. So it takes two arguments, one a string of what that event is called, and then the second argument is a function. In this case, I'm just calling delete thing like this. And then when I click this, it just deletes them. And I can also turn this into an arrow function like that. All right, let's get to the actual stuff. Let's start building. We're going to be building this. So let me pull this up. All right, so hopefully you got this from the GitHub. If you didn't, the link is in the chat. And hopefully you saw what I changed here. If you'd like, you can just download the project and then save it to a new folder and just work in that instead of changing your thing from the past events, because some of it I did change, and maybe you just want to work on it instead of seeing what I changed. So you can click code, this green button, and then download zip, then extract it to somewhere you'll remember, and then in VS Code, hit file, and then open folder, and then go to wherever you saved it. If there are any questions, feel free to ask, but I'm going to get right into it and just start. So again, the way we load things in is by adding the script tag. And one thing I'd like to mention, I'm adding the script tag at the bottom, all the way at the bottom, before this closing body tag. If I had the script tag up here, where the head is, what would happen is whenever you try to manipulate the DOM, your your code would just error out, because what the browser is doing is it grabs your JavaScript and then it's running it, but it hasn't read the rest of your HTML yet, so it doesn't know what to grab because it doesn't exist yet. So in this case, I added the script all the way at the bottom. That way, it reads in the HTML and then it creates the document object model, and then your script can actually have something to grab and change around. So we'll go into the script. And I've predefined a bunch of variables here. These are just grabbing elements from the DOM. So in this case, the actual things we're going to manipulate. And I added some to-dos, and I commented this out. So our first to-do seems to be grabbing data from GitHub. And then I even added this little link, and I can just show you what this link is on stream. But this is just the documentation for the API that we're going to call. So in this case, and this might seem like a lot of text, but if you take it piece by piece, what this is doing is this left side is describing what get a repository is, and then on this right, you can see how to grab it. And then it even gives you a little example here. So if you click on JavaScript, It even shows you how to do it. This is with a library. We're going to use something else, so this won't be applicable here. And then it shows you the thing that it returns. And I'll show you what all of this means in a little bit. But essentially, I'm going to so to do this, I have to show you a new thing that we didn't go over. There's this thing called fetch, and fetch is a function that takes in a URL. So in this case, my GitHub API repo URL. And what this does is it calls that URL. So if I open, where is it? This link, you can see it returns a bunch of data, and this is just JSON, which stands for JavaScript object notation. Yes, JSON. And so this is this basically describes a JavaScript object. And so our fetch grabs it into our code, and this returns a promise. So what is a promise? So when you run JavaScript, it runs all of your code instantly. So it doesn't wait on anything. Or well, how to explain this? So if you have a function that takes a while, so in this case, I have to call a website, which takes some time. JavaScript is not going to wait on that. It'll just continue running your script. So in this case, fetch returns something in the future. And the way you grab that future value is by doing .then. And in this case, fetch returns a response object. And what this is doing is it's turning that text into JSON that we can work with. And let's say and then you can do another then, and what this does is this is an arrow function, but like really small. So if you don't write anything, any brackets, what it does is it just returns whatever .json returns. So in this case, it returns the JSON, a JavaScript object from the response text, and it passes it to the next then in the chain, which is this data. So now we have the thing from the API, it's stored in this data. So if we actually console.log this data stuff, and we uncomment this to actually call this function, so we have to call it, and let's open up reveal it in File Explorer. So I saved it here. Double click this. And then if we right click, inspect, go to console, it console.logged the API stuff. So now this is all something we can work with. And now that it's a normal JavaScript object, we can start grabbing data from here. So in this case, once I have my data, I want this element, the repo stars element, to let's see. I want to actually show you what this looks like. So what I did for the UI is I hid this out. If you went to our past events, you'll know that it actually looks like this. Right now it's loading, but so in the past events we like hard-coded values in there. I want to actually show like the amount of stars that this has. So in this case it's 0 because no one's started yet, but in other big repositories, if you have a repo with stars, it'll actually show it in. So if we look at our object and scroll down, you'll see that this object has where is it? Stars. Forks. This should have a stars property. Ah, yes, it's called stargazers count. So this is the actual count that it grabbed from the API. So if we go back to our code, this data has that property. So if we just say, and we want to manipulate the DOM as well. So we grab our variable, then we say text content. So text content is a property of this object. And then we set it equal, so we're assigning it the stargazers count from this data. So if we look back, we refresh this. Because I have it hidden, if you want to see it, you can right click this empty space, inspect, and I wrapped it in this element, and I'll make this bigger for everyone. But I wrapped it here. If I scroll down here and uncheck this, you'll see that now it says 0. So even though this is a static website and I didn't put that 0 in, I called an API and it gave me that data, and then I put it in my website. That shouldn't change, but I used JavaScript to change it up. So let's do it for the rest of the data. So let's do it for forks as well. So if anyone wants to fork this repo, it'll actually show up. And this data has a forks count, so we're assigning it to this. And let's do the same for the commits. So whenever someone commits something to the repo, I actually want to show it here as well. So if we open this, I want this message to show up on my website. So we can call this URL, this commits URL, and do that as well. So this is done. Done. And let's do the same for this. So I'm going to make a fetch call to this URL, and then it returns text. So I'm going to turn it into JSON, and then I'm going to do the same thing where I grab the last commit element. So these are all variables that you can just grab, and then set the text content to the data that it returns. And we can look at that data as well. And this is the API. But if you just open this, and if you refresh this, you can see that it output this. Oh, wait. I didn't save. Remember to save. Control S, refresh, and then it outputs it here. And so this object has a commits property that is its own that has its own properties, and then in this commit property it has the author. So it has my name, and it has the message. So this is what I want. And the way I grabbed it was, so I have, oops, this is the link to our Discord. So I have this data object. I want to grab the commit property, so data dot, and then that's the property. And then commit has its own message property, so dot message. So data dot commit dot message grabs that property. And then same thing for the authors. I want to grab my name, and that happens to be the author property, and it has a login property, and I just grab it from there. And I just set it equal to the text content property of my element. Now if I save and I do the same thing here where I inspect and uncheck this opacity thing, now it's showing all that data that I just grabbed. So whenever I push a new commit to that repo, I don't have to go back to my website and update it and add that text manually. It just grabs the API, and the API has that updated data, and it just updates my website. So what else? We have another to do. So when you load in the website, that is hidden. I want it to show once both of these fetch calls are done. So I wrote down that I can use promise.all, and that's exactly what we're going to do. And this is done. So done. So what promise.all is it's a helper function for promises, and what it does is you give it and so we can save these to repo call commit call. So if we pass it an array of promises, so I saved, these return a promise. I saved that promise to this variable, and now I can pass these promises to this promise.all. And what this does is this function returns its own promise, and it returns that promise when the other promises are done. So this is a way to check, like, oh, did all of my API calls finish? And I can pass it in a then, and then I want to unhide my stuff. So what this just did was, first off, this is not right. Apologies. Sometimes Copilot just gives me stuff. Never just blindly trust code. So the way I hid stuff, so if I go back here, is I'm setting this opacity to 0. And I also have this hidden thing to true. What this does is for screen readers, it doesn't read this out loud because it's loading, so screen readers don't need to know it. So when I want to show it, I should set opacity to 1, so it makes it not transparent, and it just shows it, and it should set this to false so that screen readers can read it. So when all of my promises resolve, I'm going to pass an arrow function, and I saved this. So this DOM element is called Project Showcase UI. I grabbed it by element ID, and then I can, in my promise call, these nodes have a style property, which is how you can change styles on your element. In this case, like in this index.html with the style attribute with an opacity of 0, I want to set it to 1, and that should show it. And I should set this hidden property to unhide. And you can do that by setting the attribute. So .set attribute, and then you pass it the attribute name, which is in this case area hidden, and we set it to false. So now screen readers will be able to show it. Now, these promises can actually error out. So what if their internet goes out? Or what if the API goes down? Our UI should show some kind of message that it just isn't loading forever, because people are going to think that it's just stuck loading. We should show the user who visits our website that actually it just errored out. So the way you can catch errors is by chaining this to a .catch. And what catch does is it returns an error. So we're gonna give it an anonymous function that takes in the error that it gives back. And then instead of showing the UI showcase, the UI for that, what we're gonna instead do is we're gonna take this default loading thing that shows up. We're gonna grab its ID, and then we're gonna save it to a variable. And then we're gonna set the text content of that to like a message that's saying, oh, this errored out. So text content is equal to error loading project showcase. And then we're never going to actually unhide this. So it won't run this dot then because it caught an error. So instead, it's going to run this catch, and it'll never show the UI. Instead, it'll just say, oh, there was an error instead of loading. What else? Yes. I have these buttons. So let's say it errors out. So even if it errors out or it shows the data, I want people to be able to refresh. So if it shows the data and people want to see the latest version of that data, they can hit the refresh button. Or if it errors out and they want to try again, they can hit the refresh button and it'll try to grab that data again. So right now it's disabled. It's not going to do anything. If I want to undisable it or enable it, even if the API is fine or it errors out, I can do .finally. No. And so what this .finally does is after all of this, so even after all the thens and all the errors that it catches, it'll just run this always. So I have the GitHub refresh button variable here already. And I can set the disabled to false. So this has a disabled false. So this node or this button HTML button element object has a property called disabled. And if we set it to false, let me Control S and then we go back, refresh. You can see that now it enabled it. So it turned blue. And the way it turned blue is in my CSS, I told it if it's not disabled, then just set it to blue. But if it is disabled, then set it to gray. And that's what that did. And now this is done. This loading thing is still here. I want to hide that. So I have the that element saved to this variable. So once I show my UI, I actually want to hide this. So this style dot display equals none. All right. So what's the difference between opacity and display? So opacity, as you can see in this Discord thing, this is still here. So you can see my cursor turning into text. It's still there. I want it to take up the space so that when it loads in, it doesn't like jump. Like if you've ever seen a website, like when it loads an ad, it pushes everything down. That's really annoying, and I don't want that to happen in my UI, so I just hide it instead. So it still takes up the space. But if I actually set this to display none, it'll entirely take it out, so it won't take up the space. So that's the difference between those. Okay, so if I refresh, this is done. So the GitHub part is done, and as you can see, it, I can click this and it'll refresh it. Well, I didn't push anything, so it's not going to refresh anything. But yeah, that was basically it. So in the last 10 minutes, we're going to implement the Discord stuff. So let's go back to this, and this is done. Oh, wait. This button doesn't do anything because we didn't set an event listener on it. So let's do that now. If we scroll down, there's actually a to-do for this. So this GitHub refresh button, the variable that I saved it to, we're going to add event listener, and we're going to let it listen to clicks. And then so we're going to give it a function of this. So when people click our refresh button, we put all of these fetch calls into this function. So instead of having to copy and then paste this into our event listener, we can just call this function get GitHub repo data. So setting up your code very nicely, or organizing it well, comes in handy. So Control S, and now let's see. Yeah, if I refresh, it'll actually do that now. So every time I click refresh, it does that. What else? Oh yes, let's do the Discord stuff. So this is one of the more cooler things in here, showing your Discord members. So yeah. So let's show stuff from Discord. It's gonna look, as a reminder, like this. Where did it go? It's gonna look like this. So let's go back to their script. Discord has an API to grab some of the members here. And if we look at the data, it kind of looks like this. Now this isn't formatted very well. What you can do is Control-Shift-I, then you can refresh. And if you go to Network, click on this widget, go to Preview, you can kind of see the same thing from when we just console.log it. So we're going to turn this data into these UI elements. So we're never actually going to manually imagine manually coding out everyone's profile pictures and putting it in HTML. That would be very tedious. So we can just automate that with JavaScript. So we're going to grab the data from this Discord API that has all these users, and we're just going to we're going to create DOM elements with the images and everything, and it's going to look as fancy and nice as this. So and I have this function here. So, and we have some to-dos, which I placed for everyone so that we're well organized. This isn't done yet. I don't know why I did that. So let's do a fetch call to this Discord API. And similar to our GitHub fetch calls, we're going to take the text from that response. We're going to turn it into a JavaScript object notation, from that JavaScript object notation to a normal JavaScript object that we can manipulate. And then we're going to pass it to another then, and then we're going to see what that data is so we can console.log it out. But most importantly, now we can start taking that data and putting it in our DOM. So I have this Discord member count element, and this lives, where is it? Here. Right. Hashtag online users, yes. So it's going to take this span element, and yeah, we're going to set the text content of that equal to the number of members that the API returned. What else? What else do I have to update in my UI? Oh yeah, so we have this members list. So I want to show all the images of the members to make it, make our website not look as empty. And the way I can do that is the API returns. So if we look back here, this API returns part of its data. It has a members property, and it has an array or a list of all the members that are currently online. Well, actually, it isn't all of them. I think the max is like 200 or something. But for the purposes of this, we're just going to show what it gives to us. So let's make a new variable. So this members variable has all of the members from our data, and then we're going to loop through each of these. Yeah. And we're going to start creating new elements. So image element. We're going to create an image element, and this is giving me errors because I didn't close this function. So bracket this. Yeah, so now these brackets match, and so does this. So I'm creating an image element that I'll add into the DOM later. So image element, and I want to set the source attribute to the URL of the photo image. So in this case, this members thing has an avatar URL property that is a link to the image. So I'm setting my image element source equal to that. And I want to set the alt, so when you hover your mouse over it, to that member's username. And I want to add it to this, where did it go? This members list div. And I have a thing for that already. This variable holds that DOM element. So I can take this and then call the append child function and pass it in this image element, which is currently holding the image node that I created. So it doesn't exist in the DOM yet. I can add it to my DOM by calling append child. So now if I'm going to comment get GitHub repo data out, because if you keep calling that, GitHub will get mad and actually block you from it because it thinks you're spamming it and it doesn't want that. So I'm just going to comment it out so that doesn't happen to me. But I'm going to uncomment this Discord invite data because that's what we're working with. And just for now, let's unhide it. Let's unhide the UI stuff. So I have, where's it? Discord showcase UI. So similar to the GitHub thing, I have a loading element, and then I have another element with all of my actual UI. So I want to unhide it because I actually want to see if the images actually works. So we're going to set the opacity to 1. And we're going to also do the thing for screen readers where they can actually see it. And we're going to hide the loading message. So now if I save and I go to my page, which is here, and I refresh, our code works. So it created an element, an image element, and it's not in our DOM yet. So we set the source of that image element to the Discord images that are in the API, and then we added the element that we created with JavaScript to the DOM. So if we comment this out, these members that for each thing, then you'll see that it doesn't do anything because, again, we're not manipulating the DOM, or we didn't do any of the functions to actually manipulate it. So that's one of our checkpoints down. Oh, and it even showed the number of members online. This message shows up by default. So if we look back at the API, there's this channels property. And so we're all in the virtual stage right now. Oh. Let's refresh. Interesting. Okay. I've called this API before. It used to return the amount of people that were in voice channels. They seem to have changed the API to not do that anymore. So what I was planning to do is, in my function calling, is if my JavaScript saw that there were people in the virtual stage channel, I'd show this message. But it seems that I can't do that anymore because they removed that functionality. So delete this. That kind of sucks. But we still have this like images thing, so it looks dynamic and stuff. Let's enable this refresh button. So I have, in the last minute that we have for the event, let's add an event listener, and it's kind of like this, but there's a catch. So if I refresh, I have to enable the button. Where did it go? So similar to our GitHub stuff. So this dot finally. I can do this here as well because this fetch is a promise. So at the end of, after doing all the then stuff, finally enable our button, and not the GitHub refresh button, but our Discord button. Control S. Refresh. But now here's the gotcha. If I click this button, it keeps adding people in. So this is a logic error, I suppose. So it's not a syntax error. I didn't make an error with my code. I typed it all right. And it's not a type error, so I'm not assigning a string to a number or anything. So this logic error is whenever I click this refresh button, and these are all the same people, by the way. They're not like new people. So here I am once, and then here I am twice. So what's happening in this logic error is nowhere in my function am I actually like removing all of those images. So whenever I keep clicking that button, it runs this function, which calls the API, and then it keeps adding members to my list. So whenever I click that refresh button, I want to actually remove those members. I don't want it to add duplicate member images. So what I can do is, how did I do it? Yes. And we'll talk about this inner.html thing later. But if I grab my members list element, this HTML node has an inner HTML property, and I'm just going to set it to like empty, nothing, this empty string. And now if I refresh, it doesn't look like it's doing anything. You see a little flash. That's because it's removing the images. So I can actually show you. So if I uncomment this call to get Discord data, refresh, as you can see, it removed the images. So now when I call, when I click this button, it doesn't just duplicate the images. It actually, it removes the existing images and then adds in the new ones that it grabbed from the API call. Now, the members in there might not have changed, so it'll look the same. But if more people went offline and others went online, then you'll actually see the change. Let's see. And now the last thing to do is just uncomment this GitHub repo data. So now that I've coded all of this out, I can call both of my functions. And if I hit refresh, there you go. So now when people visit my website, instead of and I want to have like dynamic data, instead of me manually going in and then changing this, it'll just, or showing the members, like me putting each individual one here, it just calls these APIs and then it updates my, where did it go? My website right here. And I'll probably actually, GDSC doesn't have a link tree thing, so you'll see people with like link trees and all their links to socials. I'll probably just use this. You'll probably see this instead. Yeah, that. If there are any questions, so before everyone leaves, here's some resources. So MDM docs learn JavaScript. So if you want to continue, learning some of this, so we covered very little in this series. There's a lot you can do. So for example, what web can do today? Your browser has a bunch of built-in functions and APIs that you can leverage. So if, for example, if you were on a phone, you could capture like how the Wii had the Wiimotes and you could like move the Wiimote and it would like show up in the game. You could turn your phone into that. Like you could have a game where you move your phone and then it like uses that your motion as a control. There's an API for that. Where is it? Control F gyro. Accelerometer. I forgot what it's called, but I know there's an API for it. It's either called accelerometer or something. I forget, but if you look at this website, there's a bunch of these you can do. So let's see. You can like grab pictures from the user camera. You can save stuff to their. So if you like generated an image, you can save it to their phone. GPS stuff. So if you have a map website, you can grab the user's coordinates and then put it on a map. So if you followed along with all of the events, or if you didn't, look at the resources that are online. There's a bunch to like catch up and learn. So even just knowing HTML, CSS, JavaScript, you can see just by calling APIs and stuff and other libraries, you can easily make something cool. So what else? Like for example, Google Maps has an API, so you can add a Google Map UI to your website, and then you can, with all the DOM manipulation stuff we did, you can manipulate the map. So you can have some kind of application that has a map on it. I don't know what that, if you have an idea, what I'm basically saying is, if you have an idea, you now have the tools to implement it. It might not look pretty because you may not have the experience, but you can get the initial like steps to actually like get functionality out. And I'll include some of these resources as well. But even with just this simple like web portfolio, you should have the necessary tools to make something cool. And if you want to save like data and stuff, then I don't know, just look it up. Firebase. This is a thing from Google. So if you want to make an app, for example, and you want to save user data, then this is a way to do it. This is and we're not going to go too deep. I'm just giving everyone ideas on what you can do now that you have these tools, or the necessary knowledge to take advantage of the tools that I'm showing you. But the rest is just you figuring out what you want to do, what you want to build. So there's documentation here on how to like save data, and If you have a question on how to do stuff, just honestly just Google it. How do I save user data to a database on my website? And then you'll get like 50 billion results on how to do that. Or how do I make animations in my website? Just look it up, and there'll be a bunch of stuff that you can read and implement. But yeah, I'll include some resources on some things that you can read up to like make this better. Like for example, there's a canvas tag that lets you draw stuff to your website instead of just doing like elements and stuff. So I'll include some of those resources. Um, I don't have anything else. So if there are any questions, I'll stick around for a little bit while people are still here. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the Project Talk channel, and then um, I'm basically like the web guy here at GDSC, so I'll probably answer them. Yeah, I have a bunch of web experience, so I'm very happy to help out with any of your website questions. Yeah, that's it for now. Enjoy the weekend. If you have any questions, I'll stick around for a bit or post them in Project Talk chat channel.